What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Before the Whistle. I'm your host, Maddy, and I'm here to break down the Tulane Green Waves' 21-3 win over the Southern Miss Golden Eagles over in Hattiesburg this last Sunday, which moves them to 2-1 on the season, 1-0 on the week, and a really good bounce back from what was a really hard-fought battle that wasn't fairly depicted really in the final score in their loss to Ole Miss last week. I thought you saw Kai Horton really step up into the role at starting quarterback, have command, have poise back there. And the receivers stepped up in a big way as well. After they kind of faltered and had some key drops in that Ole Miss game, you saw Lawrence Keys, Jaquan Jackson, and Chris Brazzell really come into their own as a trio. And you saw the running game for Tulane, I think, finally started to get some of those kinks working out. That might be a byproduct of having the backup quarterback in, and maybe it's not, but either way you spin it, you have promise from your backup quarterback. You saw not just one, but two rushers break out for Tulane. And my God, is this defense the real deal? And I will get to that in a moment, but we'll start with the offense, which definitely deserves its flowers for their win this last weekend. First, let's just talk about Tulane's quarterback room for a moment here. I know that a lot of people were upset, rightfully so, after the loss to Ole Miss, knowing that more likely than not, if Michael Pratt was starting, I strongly believe that Tulane would have won that game. And that's not a knock on Kai Horton. That just goes to show you why you have a starting quarterback and a backup quarterback. But something that has just always been on my mind for the last couple of years is I feel like, and this is in the NFL too, I just keep thinking back to the years where it was Drew Brees playing for the Saints, and then Chase Daniel was the backup quarterback forever. And then he was replaced by Josh McCown, neither of which you really want as your starting quarterback moving forward in a season. And it felt like, by pure coincidence, when Sean Payton signed Teddy Bridgewater to the Saints, I believe in 2020, I want to say, because that part of my brain and during the pandemic is really just gone. But then immediately Drew Brees goes down and Teddy Bridgewater comes in and actually has to win games for the Saints. And it felt like ever since that happened, the NFL has really switched towards having quarterback rooms where you have more than one real starter going on there, because again, you just have really had those clipboard quarterbacks back in the day. And now you have them adding on that third quarterback rule as a result of what happened to the 49ers in the NFC Championship game last year. But in terms of quarterback luck, I guess you could call Tulane as equally unlucky as they are lucky in that regard. Unlucky because, it's been 3 seasons now where the backup quarterback has had to come in for at least one game, but you're lucky that you thought your backup quarterback last year was Justin Ibieta. He unfortunately goes down in the opening series against Houston. And then Kai Horton comes in, wins the game in overtime with an awesome walk-off touchdown pass that he threw to Tajay Spears 2 feet in front of my face. And it's safe to say that I think everyone had maybe a little unfair expectations of what he would be able to do going into this Ole Miss game where, yeah, that game he really wasn't expecting to start. But I think there's also something to be said about the mentality of not really having any time to get in your head. And, I'm not saying this is all really just speculative one way or another, but it's definitely daunting when you know that there's a strong chance that you're going to have to go out there, play an SEC opponent at home, know that it's the biggest game in, some people say Yeoman Stadium history, I guess if you're counting regular season and not counting the conference championship for me, but it's a lot to put on a young quarterback's shoulders that faced a pretty formidable pass rush. And again, they're still trying to figure out who's going to replace Tajay Spears. And then you think about the Southern Miss loss last year where Tajay Spears was the leading rusher and the leading receiver. And then they went into the Houston game, and that's who Kai Horton had as his leading receiver and leading rusher on the day. And I brought that up when I was talking about the Ole Miss loss and just providing some context in terms of Kai Horton not having as much help back there. But you saw Mekhi Hughes break out in the Ole Miss game. And as I've said, there was a lot of talk of who's going to replace Tajay Spears. Why hasn't Tulane released a depth chart? If there's no one that's a top running back, then no one can be, kind of thing. I get that side of the coin, but I've talked about, again, covering quarterback competitions now and understanding the value in doing your due diligence and playing these guys out, especially when it comes to running backs and workload and limiting people's carries in general. It's just something that you have to pay a lot more attention to at that position. And so to be able to have the type of rotation that Tulane's had back there, I think you finally started to see that break out into some real promise in the Southern Miss game, where, again, I think Mekhi Hughes kind of separated himself in a surprising way, just given, again, that he didn't play at all the year prior. We'd seen Shotty Clayton Johnson, and it was pretty assumed that he would step into that running back one role. And he's gotten the start every single game. But I looked back at last year, and again, it's really hard to say because so much of the attention was paid to Tajay Spears, but Shotty Clayton Johnson didn't really come on until the second half of last year. But once he did, there were several games where, if Tajay Spears wasn't out there, you would have felt like you were okay. I believe in the USF game, both of them rushed for over 100 yards in that matchup. And he had some really key plays in Memphis, including a really insane touchdown right in front of my face, and some really solid runs in the Cotton Bowl as well. So you go into Southern Miss, and last year, again, that was one of the 2 losses on the schedule. It was a 3-point loss that was sealed by a pick 6 and just a lot of blunders on special teams. But injured quarterback and Michael Pratt playing against, the guy that developed him off the bench. And maybe there's something to be said about the fact that he didn't know that much about Kai Horton in comparison to Michael Pratt. And I think the type of offense that they run for Kai Horton, it just seems like he's able to roll out a little more. And there's a little more comfortable play style. And you saw it a little bit in the Houston game. And I think you saw that more in the Southern Miss game, but you saw him throwing with confidence. You saw him spread the ball out to, I believe, 6 different receivers. And like I said in the intro, that trio of Lawrence Keys, Jaquan Jackson, Chris Brazzell, I know a lot of them had tough days at the office last week, but that's probably one of the tougher secondaries that they're going to face. And when they switched to man coverage, it was just really hard for them to separate. Well, good Lord, it wasn't even so much the separation that they had as much as it was the downhill vision, the route running, the crisp footwork, and really throwing in anticipation by Kai Horton. I was really lucky now to be very up close to 2 insane runs. And I'd almost call Jaquan Jackson's, his long reception for 35 yards for a touchdown, very close to the Tajay Spears hurdle that I saw in the championship game, where I noticed that Jaquan Jackson had a bunch of open field to his left, but if you look at that play, he goes and cuts to the right and kind of follows his blockers, but just his ability to accelerate through those holes, I could see his eyes, and it just looked like he was completely possessed out there. And I was very close to having a punt return for a touchdown, which unfortunately got nullified for a penalty, and he stepped out of bounds, but you really see that speed start to play off. And I remember talking to Lawrence Keys after the final Tulane scrimmage this fall camp and asking him what kind of he's looking to improve on this year, if he's kind of changed the routes that he's running. And for him, he said it was more of just the mental switch of knowing that he's not just a slot motion guy, that you saw him a little bit be used in that way in the 22 year, that he is able to run all those different routes, first, second, third level of the field. It was just kind of that gaining that confidence in himself. And I think, again, a lot of that time paid with Michael Pratt this offseason. But again, stepping up for your backup quarterback is one of the most important qualities in a receiver. Whenever you talk about the backup quarterback situation for the Saints, you have to think of the context that Michael Thomas was a massive help to Teddy Bridgewater in several of those games. And it's safe to say that if he wasn't there making several of those catches, then you'd be viewing that 4-game stretch where I think he went 4-0 a lot differently. And again, I think you could kind of see that in the Ole Miss game, but you really saw the potential of this receiving group. And Chris Brazzell on that touchdown, there's been, I just think, a lot of attention paid to crisp route running and footwork and the ladder drills in fall camp, throughout practice, what Derek Sherman has done. And you think about the fact that what he did with the running backs last year, how he's been able to really get these guys going early on. Again, Chris Brazzell was hurt and didn't play last year. And that touchdown where he just had really quick footwork off the line of scrimmage, ran just a really quick route over the middle. Kai Horton, again, throwing with great anticipation, like he did for a crossing route that Lawrence Keys had ran earlier in the game. And suddenly you're really seeing a lot of promise on this offense. What you also saw was I believe it was the first reception, and if it wasn't the first one, the most credible one by Shotty Clayton Johnson off a little dump out pass that he went 21 yards for. And you saw his downfield vision there. You saw his burst. You saw his lower body explosiveness, his ability to shake off tackles. But you also saw that in the run game with him and Mekhi Hughes. I mean, Tulane went for 159 yards on the ground, but that was really evenly split up between Shotty Clayton Johnson and Mekhi Hughes. Mekhi Hughes led the team 2 weeks in a row with 83 yards on 14 carries, averaging 5.9 yards a carry. And he had a long run of 27 yards, and just his ability to shake off tackles and stiff arm players. I keep bringing up how much time he spent in his rehab process with Tajay Spears. And I think you see a lot of the things that he picked up from Spears translating early on. Again, that's, if I'm correct, this is really Mekhi Hughes' first season playing, and his game speed is really already there. Shotty Clayton Johnson was following him up with 12 carries for 66 yards, and he was averaging 5.5 yards a carry. to have two running backs now that are able to get you, between 26 carries, pretty much 100 yards between the two of them, over 100 yards. I literally can't do math. Then you're looking at a really solid offense. And I will say that I think the strongest point of Southern Miss's game was their defensive line. And I thought that it was the same, and just their ability to bring pressure from that second level with the linebacking group as well. And I thought that was really a kryptonite tonight that, again, when you had Michael Pratt playing a little hurt and they just kind of blew up Tulane's O-line last year, it made things really difficult for them. But you saw the O-line struggle a little bit at times, but I continue to point out how calm the sideline has really been these last couple of weeks, and paying attention to kind of those inner game meetings with the position group coaches. Dan Rochar is so even keeled with these guys and just keeping them so focused. But I brought this up on the sideline during the Southern Miss game. It's been a really enjoyable couple of weeks where, when there aren't the obvious leaders, I think you're seeing a lot of guys really start to step up all across the board. And I saw that in Josh Remitich, who just kind of came in and really got on the O-line after a poor series. And it's just kind of good to see someone who's pretty quiet and you don't really hear make that much noise getting really into the game. And I just felt like it was a 4-quarter game, played really strong by Tulane, even though it took them a little while to get the offense going in the first half. What you don't see from Kai Horton is him forcing things, him making really bad decisions when he gets stressed out. If anything, there are times where, instead of taking a sack, could have thrown the ball out of bounds, what have you. But I think that he really handled that slogger pretty well. And you have to remember, again, that there is this long-term goal of setting up the run game. And even if it's not getting that far in the game, both long-term and within a game itself, it's not a surprise to me that they leaned on the running game in the first half. And then all of a sudden you see them throw, why is math so hard for me? 2 passing touchdowns in the second half. And it all seems a lot more easy in the air after that opening drive where Kai Horton, rushed in for a touchdown. It's probably his first rushing touchdown. I'd have to check that. But again, just all of those phases paying off, including the tight end room. I just wanted to shout out Chris Carter on one of his receptions. First of all, it was the sickest one-hand grab I have seen in a long time, but that play doesn't go anywhere without Chris Carter in the first place, because he had a key block at the line of scrimmage and got the rusher that he was trying to block off of his step a little bit in order to just get a little bit out in space. And as that defender was running free to Kai Horton, he quickly dumps the ball off to Chris Carter. All of a sudden he has a gain for 8 yards. So again, 6 different receivers having the ball spread out by Kai Horton, the team remaining patient, and now seeing 2 horses really start to come out at that running back room. And they can only stand to gain more confidence going into this game against Nicholls State next week. I mean, it's no offense to Nicholls State, but just considering the pedigree and how we saw them play, again, on both sides of the line of scrimmage against Ole Miss, and to see what South Alabama did against Oklahoma State also shouldn't go unnoticed either, in terms of that being a quality win for Tulane. But this game goes to the defense again. As a defense person, I cannot say how much of a joy it has been to watch these last couple of weeks, especially when I think that was really the question mark going into this season. Now, granted, that was, again, with Michael Pratt at quarterback, and I think you could probably switch things around here and there, but you could compensate a lot for the Tajay Spears loss with someone like Michael Pratt under center. Whereas, how do you compensate for entire position groups going on defense in your safety group and your linebacking group? When you look at the numbers and when you watch them play and you watch where they come from and bring pressure and blitzing and their tackling in that game, which was such an improvement from the last game, not to mention how much their conditioning stands out in comparison to other teams. Yes, this was the second week in a row where there were very conveniently timed cramps, what have you, for Southern Miss players, but I'm not in the business of speculating on any of that, just in case, again, even though there's some booing going on by our fans that traveled on some of those plays. I get it. It was a little more obvious in the Ole Miss game, if we're being honest. But if any of those cramps are real, Tulane has basically had none thus far. And I can now attest to, my ode to Yeoman Stadium's turf really just solidified itself, because you would have thought that we were back in July in New Orleans on asphalt, basically, with how much the turf there, even though it said it was cool turf, if it's rubber, it ain't cool. Coconut and cork is quite literally the only way to actually get a cool playing surface. And as someone that spent 12 years or so of my life playing competitive soccer on turf, I was dramatically exhausted and hot that entire game, and you could just feel it coming up through your legs. But again, for Tulane to be able to make all the stops they did on third down, to only allow 3 points on defense and do so with a lot of rotation, but absolutely really no issues with conditioning thus far. I don't think that you could have gotten a more positive outlook than what we saw in this Southern Miss game. I'm going to start with a wild stat, and I'm going to credit Fear the Wave blog for posting this on Twitter. Tulane football has faced 3 all-conference running backs thus far this season. Not a single one has reached 50 yards. That includes LaDamian Webb from the first game, Judkins from the Ole Miss game, and now Frank Gore Jr., who had 13 carries for 16 yards in, again, 21-3 victory that Tulane had this weekend. I just keep going back to what Patrick Jenkins told me at Tulane's media day, that Shieldwood was going to have them flying all over the place, and you would see them coming from all different levels of the field and really just have these guys loose and flying around all over the place. And my gosh, has that come to fruition literally immediately to hit the ground running. Just to put things in perspective, Tulane's defense last year had 24 total sacks through 3 games this season, one of which being an SEC school, the other one being a team that just beat Oklahoma State and South Alabama. They have 12 sacks through 3 games and 4 quarterback hurries on top of that. That is 16 plays where they have affected the quarterback. Patrick Jenkins leads the team with 3.5 of those sacks. 2.5 of those came on third down, including one of his 2 hurries. Cameron Hamilton follows him up with 3 total sacks, one of those being on third down. Corey Platt had 1 fourth down sack. Unfortunately, that's going to be all we see from him this season. Eric Hicks, his 1 sack came on third down. Darius Hodges has 2.5 sacks. 1.5 of those came on third down, and he has a half a hurry with Jared Small. And then Keith Cooper has 1 fourth down sack and 1 hurry. So that is, again, that's interior pressure. That's exterior pressure. That's hurries coming from your linebacking group, sacks coming from your linebacking group. 12 sacks and 4 hurries in 3 games, and not allowing teams to get anywhere with their rushing attack. If you can shut down the run like that and force teams to have to throw, then they're really relying on a lot in the air. And as much as you saw Tulane start to work through those growing pains on offense, just to, again, give some perspective here, as much as people want the answer to Tajay Spears to pop out of nowhere, Tulane's offense is faring a lot better than any single running back that has tried to get anywhere against this Tulane defense. I've been tallying this now because it's just worth going through this. In the Ole Miss game, they had 8 third down stops, and these came from 8 different players. They had 8 runs go for no gain or a loss. That was from 7 different players. USM, they also had 8 third down stops. Again, 8 players making those contributions, and they had 9 runs go for no gain, 7 for a loss in that. So 9 total. So 2 no gains, 7 for loss. And those were 7 different players. And I'm now going to go as far as to break down who's really contributing on those run stops and on third down, because I think you're seeing so many guys step up here in so many position groups, and really some surprises, really in the secondary. So on those runs for no gain or a loss, they have 17 total now, if my math is correct here. 5 of those came from the D-line. 6 of those came from the linebacking group. 5.5 from the defensive backs. But when you break that down, 4 of those came from the safeties. And it's 4 each. I'm putting Cam Pettisflow in the safety group as he's playing that slot role, but you also see him drop back to, it's most often cover 2, if what have you, having the middle of the field open. He's usually back there with either DJ Douglas or Bailey Despaney, but it's him, Bailey Despaney, Darius Swanson, and DJ Douglas that all have stops for no gain or a loss on those runs. And something that, again, I brought up on this podcast, and I had asked Willie Fritz about this at Pro Day when we were talking about Lemmy Young and Larry Brooks and Macon Clark and how much they brought to the table and their ability to come downhill, stop the run, and make those open field tackles. And he said that was going to be one of the primary points of emphasis. What they were going to have to replace this year was that ability by that safety group. And I just have to say that I think that group has been the biggest surprise, even though the linebacking group has just continued to step up week by week and be the leading tackler on the team every single week. It was Corey Platt in week 1, Tyler Grubbs in week 2, and then it was Jesus Machado this week. But I think the safeties, you had Tyler Grubbs come in, you had Jared Small come in, and then you had those guys developing behind Nick Anderson and Dorian Williams. And the fact that your defensive coordinator is your position group coach for the linebackers, try to kind of give a little bit of the edge there. But I think DJ Douglas and Bailey Despaney have stepped up massively. And I think Darius Swanson has really come on strong. You see his ability to cover, you see his ability to read those plays downfield and come down and make those stops. But when you look at the 1.5 stops by Jarius Monroe, notice how much that he has been blitzing off the line of scrimmage and really getting to that backfield. It was something that caught my eye a few practices ago, and you saw them play that a little bit against Ole Miss, but you really saw that coming on strong. And it's just a question of what philosophy that you follow. I've said this, I am a defender at heart, and I was a very aggressive defender at that. I very much did not play bend, don't break defense because I was on a team that was pretty much unable to score points for the majority of my final season. And knowing that if we allowed even 1 point or 1 goal, that was probably going to be a loss. And so being 5'3" and not the quickest person out there or the most naturally physically gifted, if you will, I was pretty scrappy and had to make up for a lot of that with that type of ability. And I just feel like I'm really seeing my spirit animal come out in this angry wave defense. Again, as much as Nick Anderson and Dorian Williams and all those household names last year were so fun to watch on defense as a scheme and a philosophy, and just from that perspective, I'm just honestly having the time of my life. It really has just been to see again all these groups step up and to hear how all of them talk about their position group coaches and Shieldwood. In the post game, Willie Fritz had pointed to Shieldwood and all of the staff members on defense for putting together an incredible game plan. And then when Corey was interviewing Jarius Monroe in the locker room for the post game interviews that we do, he said something to the same effect of how much of a genius Shieldwood is. And it is not the first time I've heard this, and it's not even close. I heard AJ Hampton say pretty much those exact words during media day, Tyler Grubbs, and how much he's able to ask him questions about any single level of the field. And I just think that he has really taken this challenge, and for all, again, of all this coaching staff turnover and all of the player turnover, you've seen this defense just come out of the gate swinging and really take charge of this season with the fact that you had your starting quarterback be out for week 2 and week 3 now. And a lot of teams falter in those situations and a lot of defenses give up. But I think you see these guys really rise to that challenge and just getting super hungry. And to get to those third down stops, it's the same thing where it's really split up. It's something like 16 or 16 and a half. I screw myself up when I add the 0.5s, and then in my head, I've done it twice. But again, to break that down, those runs for no gain and loss, just to recap, 5 from the defensive line, 6 from your linebacking group, 5.5 from your defensive backs, 4 of those being in the safety group. Third down stops, 4.5 of those came from the defensive line. You have 4 different players making those stops, 2 from the linebacking group, and 9.5 from the defensive backs, 6 of which came from the safeties. Bailey Despaney leads the team with 3. He had a pass breakup on one of them. Cam Pettisclo has 1, and DJ Douglas has 2, including a pass breakup as well. But my player of the game in this last game was Lance Robinson. And when you look at his third down stops, he has 2.5. He has an interception and a pass breakup on that. And then Jarius Monroe had back-to-back pass breakups. There were 7 players that had, or there were 7 different pass breakups by 6 different players. Jarius Monroe, again, had 2 back-to-back ones, but the timing of Lance Robinson's plays just could not come at better times. Whenever the team needs a turnover, it just seems like he has really come out of nowhere. In the South Alabama game, after they gave up pretty much that wide open play in the end zone, that next series was when Lance Robinson made an interception. And then last week, when Kai Horton turned the ball over on an interception, you saw that defense intercept the ball right back. I think it was actually switched the other way around. And unfortunately, that's where things went downhill. But that was a third down interception by Lance Robinson. And the pass breakup that he had in the end zone was probably, besides the one play that no one seemed to see that tight end coming on the Frank Gore Jr. pass that I didn't even know Frank Gore Jr. had thrown, because, not to get totally off topic here, but it's been interesting just talking with the broadcast group and how we all look at such different things on the field, where Corey didn't see that it was him either because he was following it downfield. Steve saw it, and I didn't see it because I was looking at the linebacking group and the fact that they were setting up a blitz, which unfortunately that blitz went to the wrong side. Just to go to show you where all of our eyes are kind of looking at all times, I had noticed that Jesus Machado was really kind of stacking the box on the right side. But getting back off of that tangent on topic to this one, on that third down stop, that was really the time that they had kind of made their way down the field. And I think, again, Tulane was patient and didn't need to be the hero on offense. But if they score a touchdown and then it's 21-10, it looks a little closer. And then again, they had 2 stops, and I believe that was when the 3 points were, that was their only point. So I guess I take that back, where it would have been 21-7, but still, again, giving a little boost to that side of the ball where they had missed a field goal earlier in the game. And again, Cam Pettisville had a pass breakup. And then Lance Robinson, if you go back and rewatch that third down pass breakup, just where he was when the play started, his read and his ability to get the whole body in front of that player, punch the ball out without drawing a flag. And that was something that stuck out to me on the back-to-back pass breakups by Jarius Monroe as well, who has drawn flags in the past on some of his tighter coverage. And I had noticed that right before that series, I didn't exactly hear what JJ McCleskey, one of our defensive back assistants who's been on the staff for an incredibly long time, was again on the Saints defense when the Dome Patrol was there. I talked to him about Sam Mills, how Nick Anderson reminds him of him, and he's just really a DB whisperer. Well, he certainly whispered something to Jarius Monroe because he went out there and he played those two pass breakups with poise, staying in phase, good technique, and really just positioning himself in front of the ball. And just the mental toughness by that group. Again, where they're finally driving down the field, and then you see two defenders make back-to-back pass breakups. I went over to Lance Robinson after that. He just gave me a fist bump and said, "Bend, don't break, baby." And I mean, that's certainly not the way this defense has been playing for most of the year, but it's good to see that that's still the ability for them to kind of play that way and have that mindset switch of, when you are playing a little bit more aggressive, you do run the risk of sometimes having those big plays happen. But I think the same bend, don't break philosophy applies in what he was saying, and you just have to make that one stop. And it's safe to say that Tulane is doing an incredible job of doing so. But again, for a defensive line that was really not a point of strength for Tulane last year, it is wild how deep they are and just the sacks and production that they have. And just to kind of run through these final stats before I go into my individual accolades, all around the league, this run defense is 9th in FBS football. They are 6th in how many yards per rush they allow, with averaging 1.5 yards per carry, and they allow on average 63 yards per game. They're tied 5th in the league in sacks with 12 total, tied 10th for tackles for loss, averaging 8.7 per game, but they are tied 5th in solo tackles for loss with 23 on the year. So again, that's just numbers that really speak to coaching and stepping up by all three levels of this defense. If you go back again and just watch how many times they rotate on that defensive line, to have the ability when Devin Deal goes out for a targeting call to not even miss him at all, and to have 5 sacks in their opening game, 4 sacks in the game following that, 3 in this game, 2 hurries in this game. And it just feels like they probably could have had 5 or 6 more if they were just a little closer here and there. But just again, and it's coming from the interior, it's coming from the edge, it's coming from linebackers. We've seen now, again, multiple cornerbacks blitzing. We've seen them drop Cam Pettisville back to safety, and the depth they have at cornerback as well. They bring in Tahir Noor a little bit and have this kind of 3-person rotation going on with AJ Hampton, Lance Robinson, and Jarius Monroe. And there is nothing more valuable than cornerback depth. And you saw that in immediate practice for Tulane last season when Jaden Kennedy went down in the Memphis game. Jarius Monroe literally stepped in and made the game-ending interception to seal that victory, and then, has run away with the starting job ever since. But to be able to have even just a little bit of that rest time and give those guys just a chance to get a breather during a series, that is a gift. And to be able to, again, swap into Tahir Noor, he plays some at cornerback. He swapped in a little bit for Cam Pettisville in that slot role when he's either dropping back or giving him a rest or two. Shaquem Laster's gone in there a few times. And these linebackers, man, I mean, again, I think that as much as Tajay Spears was a question mark, and eventually we are really going to stop talking about these guys, but it's really just to speak to how impressive that group has been when, again, they led the team in tackles in week 1, and that leading tackler in Corey Platt is unfortunately out for the season now. Tyler Grubb steps up in the Ole Miss game and makes wild tackles to lead the team in tackles in the second week. Now you have the third week in the row where the linebacking group is leading the team, and now it's Jesus Machado. So it's been 3 different players now that have been stepping up for them, and just the way that they get to the football, and that includes Jared Small as well, in Jesus Machado, Grubbs, and Small. The way that they are able to read that backfield, the click and close ability by them, and their ability to play lateral, to just do so many things back there. And they faced probably some of the stauncher offenses that they're going to face, at least for a little while. So I'm curious to see how they kind of approach this game against Nichols. But man, again, when starting quarterbacks go down for teams, usually it does not bode well for this season. And I know that they've fallen out of the rankings, and I don't really understand how rankings work, how you can fall after a win, and how it makes no sense to me. But I mean, Power 5, G5 bias, what can you do? I don't really know when Tulane's going to kind of climb back into those, but if you're just box score watching, I think this game was really impressive. But if you just, again, think about how many players they had to replace, how much coaching staff turnover they have, the fact that their starting quarterback, who was the AAC Offensive Player of the Week, Senior Bowl Offensive Player of the Week in week 1, was nearly perfect in the air in that game, went down, and you had a close loss that, again, was pretty much a 7-point margin up until the end in that Ole Miss game. And then you have him responsible for all touchdowns in that game, where he threw 2 passing touchdowns and then had that rushing touchdown. You're finding answers at running back, and you're seeing all 3 levels of this defense just go absolutely bananas. And then you have the lanyap on special teams, where Lawrence Keys downs a punt at the 1-yard line. I don't know why players keep running into Jaquan Jackson, but they should probably stop. And again, if not for that penalty that nullified that punt return, there was this phrase when we first met Jaquan Jackson in the 21 year where he called himself ATM, for automatic touchdown machine. And the amount of touchdowns that got called back that year on his returns. Last year when we went to USF and we were at Raymond James Stadium, I remember looking up at the scoreboard and seeing reverse ATM be up there. And it was hilarious because I've never seen that before. It's where you put cash in and it spits you out a debit card. And I told him, I was like, I guess that you're reverse ATM now. And then he finally got that one against Memphis. But man, just the speed by this receiving group that you saw in the first game. And I just, again, I think that it was a little too tall of a task for everyone involved in the Ole Miss loss, but you saw heart, grit, and them really hold that SEC team absolutely their own for 3.5 quarters and really match, if not win, the line of scrimmage battle. The O-line was a little shakier in this game, but again, I think that the D-line is a point of strength for Southern Miss, but the defensive line for Tulane is elite. These linebackers and their run stop ability, elite. And this safety group, their ability to cover. There were several plays in this last game where you saw Bailey Despaney, DJ Douglas, Darius Swanson carry these guys and have range to the extent of guys like Marcus Williams, where they came from a single high alignment, went all the way over to one side of the field to either, shade and provide that backup help for whatever cornerback was there. But there were several plays where, and I think that was, it was Bailey Despaney's 3rd down pass breakup where he just flew across the field, that backfield. And there was a couple plays where you saw those safeties look to almost follow a player running downfield, see a player in the flat and run down and make that tackle and stop the run. It's just everything that you could ask for in a defense, and one that has absolutely no signs of letting up. And going into this game against Nickel State and then having their bye week, I would be really afraid to face this rested defense coming out of that. There are a lot of questions about whether Tulane would be able to repeat the success that they had last year. And I mean, fair enough question. I know that you're battling a lot of perception and history with the Tulane fan base that has been loyal and seen a lot of rough goes at football seasons, myself included. As a student, there was a graphic that was being circulated on Twitter of if you're a loyal fan and you stayed through some game, and one of the Tulane, I can't remember, I think it was fifth quarter Tulane, posted the UConn Tulane 7-3 loss in 2015, where the only points scored were defensive interception by the other team and then a field goal by Tulane in a torrential downpour. And that was my final game as a student and what I thought would be literally my last experience at Yeoman Stadium, if I'm being honest. And so I get what we're battling here in terms of the way that Tulane used to be, but I think that all starts and ends with Willie Fritz. And I had done this in a previous episode. I think it was my last one before the season started, where I'd gone back and looked at his head coaching record and just his ability to sustain success in back-to-back seasons at every single level of college football that he has coached at. I don't think gets enough credit. And I think you're really seeing that start to pay off in 3 games already. I know it's jumping the gun to say that after just 3 games played, but when you look at, again, the pedigree of the first 2 teams that they played, when you consider the fact that Southern Miss was one of their 2 losses last year, and that they did it this year with the backup quarterback and an entirely new defense in terms of linebacking and safety group and coaching staff, new guys at running back, where you had Tajay Spears as a leading rusher and the leading receiver at this point last year in that Southern Miss game. It's just, I mean, again, they're figuring out their answers at running back. You've solved the answer at linebacker. You've really solved the answer at safety. And you could feel incredibly confident in what you already should have been confident in the defensive line and that quarterback room, that Tulane's defense is stacked. And that's, to me, what wins you championships at the end of the day. 46-45 Cotton Bowl aside, I mean, you could see what happens when Tulane's running full strength with Michael Pratt at the helm. And now I think you're seeing just how real this defense is going to be this year. And helps when you don't have to think about rushing back your quarterback. I would request that everyone stop asking me the status of Michael Pratt, and then just know that I will only be able to give you coach speak answer, because I am not going to give away injury information to a detriment of the team getting that information earlier in the week. So I'm just throwing that as a PSA out there. I am sorry to everyone that continues to ask me about his status. You are getting what we're putting out there. And to an extent, every game has been a game time decision. And I just, again, this is just me speculating, but I don't see a reason to rush him out there when you have the bye week. You have the UAB game, so maybe he gets his feet wet in that matchup. But just the fact, again, that you don't have to worry about rushing him back. And it's for multiple reasons. It's you have a defense that can hold their own. You have a quarterback that has grown confident, throwing with anticipation and just having command and poise back there, even getting a rushing touchdown in Kai Horton. And you've seen the run game now have two strong outings. And you could really count the first outing from Mekhi Hughes as well. But to have two guys come in strong, and you see that just continue to grow from Mekhi Hughes, but see someone step up and Shawty Glayton Johnson, you just really couldn't ask for more in a 1-0 victory. So that's all from me, y'all, and I will see you on Friday.